So hello, welcome to Masters with Masters. I'm Ed Hoffman, the NASA Chief Knowledge Officer, and we're here for a special Masters with Masters at the Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. In these programs, we bring together two master practitioners to share some of their lessons and their experiences and the challenges of working the programs and the missions that we have here at NASA. Today we have John Hamley and Vince Bilardo. John is the manager of the radioisotope power systems program. He's been at NASA for over 28 years and recently was the acting deputy director of the Space Flight Systems Directorate. And we welcome you, John,
Thank you,
to join us. And we also have Vince Bilardo, who's the Chief Program Project Integration Office for the Space Flight Systems Directorate, and previously led the Ares 1X upper stage simulation project, and has spent about 31 years also at NASA, and I welcome both of you.
Thank you, Ed.
So one of the things we'll do here is we'll have a little bit of interactivity. We have an audience here at the Glenn Research Center, and so we'll have time for questions. And we'll record these so that it's available to folks for future viewing and for learning. And where I'd like to start is with John. One of the things that's discussed a lot is the management of complex programs, complex projects, and how difficult things are, obviously, to get done. What do you see in your experience as some of the key challenges that are similar to the programs and the missions that you've been involved with?
Well, one of the things about the radioisotope power systems program is it is a multi-agency program. We have NASA, which funds the construction of the radioisotope power systems, and these are referred to often as nuclear batteries. They're the power system that we use to power space probes beyond the orbit of Mars or in other areas where solar power or more conventional power systems aren't feasible. And these are built for NASA by the Department of Energy. And so what you have is NASA funding projects within our program at the DOE to construct and fabricate our flight hardware. And on the NASA side of the house, we have this thing that most folks are aware of called 7120.5 that we all are very familiar with. And so 7120.5 is on our side, and the DOE uses a different set of management tools. And so when you have NASA managers who are used to this way of doing business and the DOE who wants to do business with their own practices, it gets very interesting, because the NASA folks want to see a certain amount of control, and the DOE folks, on the other hand, have their way of doing business. We have our rules that we follow. And so you have to find the common middle ground. And in fact, we did, as part of our program, when we first stood it up, we compared the two and found them to be, fortunately, very similar. Okay, so that was one of the first challenges that we had. And then getting used to, NASA likes to hear about things monthly, DOE likes to hear about things quarterly, and you have to go ahead and, agencies aren't very good at telling each other what to do. I mean, we want to act as independent entities. So the key there is to develop a partnership, okay? And one of the things that does not work well in that situation is a customer-supplier type of relationship, and you really have to enter into it as a partnership. Right. And then, on the other hand, are the more common things that programs face, which are budget pressures, schedule pressures. We in the radioisotope power systems program, we've had some interesting challenges. The most recent one is budgetary. But also, we were geared up and folks were ready to, we were going to provide a system called the Advanced Stirling Radioisotope Generator for our latest Discovery Discovery mission announcement that came out of Science Mission Directorate. And we were going to provide, as GFE, 2 ASRGs, as they're called, for the next mission. And what ended up happening is it's a competitive environment. Folks were geared up, ready to go. And then none of those missions were selected. A solar-powered mission was selected. So what do we do now? And part of the development of the ASRG was looking to fly on that mission to prove its flight readiness. Right. So there's those sorts of upheavals.
So a lot of different things. And partly it's two major organizations, in this case NASA, DOE, who, and you alluded to 7120, which is the NASA policy, guidelines for how to run missions, and you have organizations to do things slightly different, communicate, and how do you work that. And we'll talk more about how do you get that done when you're crossing relations. I'd like to bring Vince into the discussion. So you've obviously, I've known you for a long time. You've worked a lot of very complex programs, Ares 1X activities, and now you're involved with leading the integration of programs and projects and portfolios. As a whole, what are some of the characteristics that lead to success in this kind of environment that John defined?
Well, it starts with trying to understand your customers and really trying to understand, communicate with them, and get to know their priorities and their requirements. And in the case of a portfolio of projects like we have here at Glenn Research Center, we're actually working on the space side for 4 different mission directorates at NASA headquarters. So we've got really a multitude of customers that are establishing those requirements and providing us with the funding for what amounts to on the order of 50 projects totaling over $150 million in terms of budget each year. So it's very complex, and what we've tried to do to organize around that and be as effective as possible is to set up a management organization that our program managers and project managers live in that is what we call customer facing. So we have set up individual offices and aligned them to those 4 mission directorates who are our funding customers at headquarters. And that way we have individuals in those offices who can go out and establish an effective working relationship with their customers, whether they be at NASA headquarters or, let's say, at the Orion project office at Johnson Space Center in Houston, or with the SLS project office at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. And so you start building that relationship and build a trusted relationship with your customer. They get to know you, you get to know them, and it makes it a lot easier to then do business with them effectively over time.
Right. So we described a situation that's complex, multiple relationships, the importance of building trust. Both of you have been around for a few decades running programs. Is it more complex today than maybe 15 years ago, or is it getting more difficult to run missions, to do programs and projects because of the complexity, because of the number of the relationships, or do you not see a difference?
So I see a difference, because when I first came to the center back in '85, I worked in a branch, and that branch held all of the people necessary to do the project. I mean, it was a smaller project, but we had the engineers it was multidisciplinary. There were a lot of different engineers. We had designers, and in fact, we even potentially had technical people within that branch to go and execute that project. Okay, and so it was very stovepiped, and it was very much project oriented. And now it's different. It's matrixed.
Right.
If you come here to the center, you find that there's a matrix organization. You hire people in from over various organizations to come in. We're not co-located, and that was the other part of it as well, right? And so it becomes very complicated, and people are not necessarily assigned strictly to one project. You may buy half of the person's time for project A and the other half, or even finer resolution for other projects. And so that has changed, and the culture has to adapt to that, okay? Because really, it's been my experience that when people feel that they own a piece of that project, that this is theirs and they own it, they're much more productive, they're much more wanting to go in and work on it. And when you start subdividing people's time and that kind of thing, it becomes difficult. And so that's been one of the challenges, that we see, just to name one, and there's others.
Right. I mean, so in the past, you would have more maybe control, maybe more siloed in terms of you had the people, you knew what they were doing, you can direct them. Now it's cutting across a lot of different interfaces.
Right.
Is that your experience? Or?
It is today, and one of the challenges that goes with that then is in building the team. Because as a project manager, you don't have supervisory control.
That's right.
So, and you are getting people onto your team from maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 different offices or branches across your performing organizations at a center. So how do you get all of those people who are coming from those different organizations and meld them into a team that is unified, that likes to work together, that enjoys each other's company, and is all pulling towards the same goal.
Right.
And that's where you get into the soft side skills of being a program project manager.
Yeah, and I've seen throughout your career, I've known you that you focus a lot on the training, the development, the leadership,
Right.
and there's a lot more focus within the Project Management Institute and other places on, you know, the soft skills of the relationship, you know, because of the complexity.
That's right.
Both of you have come off of major complex, you know, missions by any standard, and you know, Vince, so you were involved in leading the integrated project team for Ares 1X upper stage simulator. You know, major complexity and a lot of things going on there. What lessons do you take from that experience to where you are today in terms of looking at it at a broader maybe portfolio project and getting the projects to be able to be effective? What did you take from that experience?
So I've talked about the importance of relationship building and of building the team, putting attention on what it takes to get the team to be a team that works together and performs well. And then it's about applying, you know, the tools and techniques of project management at that point. You've got the team in place, you've got everybody in the right seats on the bus, and now it's about defining your requirements, flowing those down into the design, making sure you've got contractors on board or whoever else you need to take the design and go manufacture it. In that case, it was an in-house project. We actually fabricated the upper stage simulator segments here at Glenn Research Center, and then we were responsible for the shipping to Kennedy Space Center, and then we took our team down there to work on the integration into the actual Ares 1X rocket itself. It was a very rewarding project. It took 4 years, and it required a lot of attention to detail on a weekly, a daily, and hourly basis to make sure that you were applying all of those techniques of project management and, you know, kind of checking all the boxes and not letting anything fall through the cracks.
So it sounds like you have to maintain the discipline of project management, but you have to also maintain the team in terms of, you know, of how folks work together.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
You know. And John, you were the primary point of contact at Glenn for the Constellation program. And what is it that you took from that to your current position? What were the key lessons?
Well, one of the things, when we stood up the RPS program office, because NASA had not had a program office previously for radioisotope power systems per se, and one of the things that I was able to do was learn from a guy who I had a lot of respect for, and that was Jeff Hamley, who ran the Constellation program. And as the Glenn POC, I was able to sit in on his program meetings. Okay, and you know, you look at the difference between the two programs, there's quite a lot of difference in budget, right? However, the one thing, some of the lessons that I learned from Jeff was just the way that he interacted with his project, or his program team, okay? And the focus on things like requirements control, things like making sure that folks understood what the requirements were and we were working to the requirements, and in order to change one of those requirements, it was difficult to do. And there was reason for that, because you want to keep the group focused on what needs to be done. If a requirements change needs to be made, of course you make it, but there was a rather strict process for that. And he relied also very heavily on systems engineering. He had a systems engineering group within the Constellation program, and we have a program systems engineer to go off and do that, to make sure that we're following the processes that we need to be following, and to allow us to tailor them when we have to, because, you know, you've got 7120.5, but the idea of that document is to be able to be tailored. And you use that as a tool to make you do the best job you can, or help you, I should say, not make you, but help you do the best job you can managing your projects. And just watching how Jeff ran his organization was probably one of the most valuable things that I took out of that. And, you know, we brought that back to the center, and I believe the center's picked up on a lot of those, you know, techniques as well.
Yeah, one of the things you pointed out was the tailoring aspect, and I want to come back to that, but
Okay.
yeah, Vince?
Well, I wanted to build on what John just said in terms of Jeff Hanley, and I had an opportunity to interact with him throughout the Ares 1X program as well. And, you know, he treated people with respect, okay? he was not one of those managers that, you know, you knew when you were going to stand up in front of him, you were going to get beat up. And, you know, in the old days, there's a lot of stories that we heard, you know, as youngsters growing up in the agency of the old-time program managers. And, you know, they would take no prisoners and, you know, left a lot of damage in their wake.
Worked with a few of those.
Right, exactly. You know? So that's not today's NASA,
Right.
if you will. I think, and this is part of the broader things that we've learned in doing complex projects, not just in the space program, but, you know, in our society in general. You get a lot further by treating people with respect, by being truthful, and by being a person that manages with integrity. And you pass those values along to the team. You lead by example, and from time to time you talk to the team about, you know, how it is that, you know, you should behave and be with others. And so I think, you know, those are some of the things that I've learned along the road as maybe more effective ways to manage and lead teams than perhaps some of the old school methods in the past.
Right. And I know the two of you have worked together, you know, for many years. Do you treat each other with respect, or do you, you know, go old school on each other every once in a while?
I don't think we've ever raised our voices at each other in a meeting. No, I respect Vince a lot. In fact, Vince came on and helped us with radioisotope power systems, and he's the kind of guy that we picked because he actually was detailed to the Department of Energy, and to help us improve our working together, the DOE agreed to allow us to send a detailee into their agency. So Vince actually wore a DOE badge for a while. And we picked him for a reason, just because of his abilities and his ability to build a team and work with you know, difficult situations, and the way he handled himself. And so as a result, I was very pleased. It's interesting, in my position, I really work for headquarters, but I wear a Glenn badge. So I asked the center to provide a project manager, and when they came back and they said, well, you know, how about Vince Bilardo, I was very happy about that. And I'm not just saying that because he said.
Because he's on camera.
Yeah,
Right.
you know.
There's probably other people would have here who you'd critique. And that would be,
But not
but so one of the things that coming through here is because of the challenges and complexity, it's about the relationships. You're working with a lot of different organizations or multiple centers. And, you know, so how do you go about building that collaboration? I know that both of you have been in situations where, in terms of Constellation or Ares 1X, it's taking Glenn, you know, a research center into a major program area. And so you have to build the credibility, and you also have to build the competence in terms of working with Johnson and with other centers there, and same thing with working with DOE. So how did you, when you first started doing Ares 1X, I'll start with you, Vince, what was did you have a strategy in terms of how you're going to build a relationship, how you're going to collaborate with Houston and other centers, or is it something that you respond to as it happens?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I think it always helps when you go in with a plan of engagement, and then you've got to be able to adapt it, you know, as you go. The first thing was getting on an airplane, and in the case of Ares 1X, we were working with Steve Cook and his team at Marshall, who was running the overall Ares 1 rocket project. And it was getting on the airplane and going down there as many times as it took to try to understand what were their requirements going to be for this upper stage simulator and for this early development test flight, what became Ares 1X. And then seeing if we could match up our skills and technical capabilities at Glenn to the needs that they had, because they had several different options for how to go build the upper stage simulator. And we felt like we had a good matchup. And so then it became a matter of making sure that we had our story together, we had a tight plan in place, and that we could go present that. And then, you know, I shouldn't, you know, sometimes the word selling is, you know, a little bit kind of, well, we don't want to use that term, but at some point it really is about putting your best foot forward and selling the capabilities of your organization. But it's trying to do that in a way that meets the customer's needs. Okay, you don't want to sell anybody something they don't really need. You're looking for a match, and if you can find that match, that sweet spot, secure the work, then it becomes about execution. Right. And continuing to satisfy the customer's requirements, you know, going forward until you deliver the project.
Yeah. And obviously, I mean, one of the things that John had said is your selection probably is a function of being able to work with others to build a relationship. So you go in there with that, that strategy. You have a sense of the requirements that need to be brought to the situation like any effective manager. And you use the word selling, and I guess what that has to do with, you have a vision, you have a goal, maybe a more conventional word, in terms of you need to bring certain expertise, you need to position your center's capability, and you need to communicate that to get people to believe.
That's right.
Because without the belief, you're not going to be successful.
Right. And that's both up and out to the customer, but it's also down and in, back home.
With your team.
Yeah. In the case of 1X, what we wanted to do was to manufacture, both design and manufacture, the upper stage simulator in-house.
Yeah.
Not everybody was necessarily on board with that strategy when we started it. So there was some selling to do back here at home to say that, yeah, we actually can do this. Here's the facility we can use. We may need to modify it a little bit. We may need to change the organization that has the people in it that are going to go do the work. And so, that's a delicate conversation to have with your senior management back home that, hey, we need to make a couple adjustments here to really position ourselves for success on this project.
Yeah. So you're not only doing the things that you need to do in terms of project management with the cost, the schedule, the planning, but you're building your own team, belief, capability, the commitment of your center, maybe headquarters, and then other organizations. And so it makes me start to think of, when do you sleep?
Yes, well,
You may not sleep.
in the middle of a project that's intense like that, sometimes you lose some sleep, but other times you're actually getting some great ideas while you sleep. So you bring those forward the next morning and go act on them.
Yeah. And so currently, John, one of the things you mentioned is NASA's working in partnership with the Department of Energy.
Right.
And obviously they have capable, smart people. They do things different ways. How do you approach the realization you're working not just with another center,
Right.
but with another agency? Maybe it's easier to work with another agency than sometimes within NASA. But how do you approach that, and what are the greatest issues that you need to stay on top of to keep it going in the right direction?
Well, I think it's the biggest thing that when you're working with two different agencies is the realization that you do things differently. And and there's been some frustration along the way, and part of it has been due to things like when NASA says engineering model, it means something to us that is completely and totally different than what engineering model means to DOE. And so the key thing is that what we're learning is that we cannot go into this relationship with a lot of assumptions. That when I say blue, you interpret it as blue.
Interesting.
Okay, and so there's got to be a lot more of the give and take between the two people working together that say, hey, what are we really doing here? And our needs, goals, and objectives have to be aligned with theirs. And to DOE's credit, we've been flying radioisotope power systems for 50 years without a single failure of the device.
Right.
They have been providing power, and they very rightly have a statement, or I shouldn't say a statement, but a culture that says we know how to do this. And they're right, they do. Okay. So when we NASA come in and say, okay, now here we are, we have this set of reporting we want you to do, we have this stuff that you have to do, there's some resistance to that, and that's normal, and you don't fight that, because if you try to fight that, and I will say that we did have a period where we were sort of getting used to each other, where it could get contentious at times, and you have to back away from that and realize that both agencies have a goal in mind. Success, mission success. And DOE doesn't want their systems to fail. NASA doesn't want our spacecraft to fail. And you have to bring that together and work that.
John mentioned the word culture, and that's a key piece. That was a key part of my experience going over to the DOE, was finding a way to learn about their culture and compare it to ours, as well as almost do like a Rosetta Stone. That he talked about engineering model. It means one thing to them, a different thing to us. So there's almost a translator that you have to build around the communication that you use.
Right.
That's critical to make sure that you're not talking past each other. And that takes the ability to listen and the ability to kind of work at the communication, really put some effort into that.
And nothing beats FaceTime. I think it was, I don't mean to name drop today, but I think it was Mike Griffin that said, the answer to your problems are not behind your desk. And that's very true. you as a project manager need to be out and visible to your team, and you need to be accessible and available, and there's nothing like a face-to-face meeting where you sit down with people. It shows, number one, you care enough to jump on a plane and go see them, right? And then that face-to-face interaction, and actually, you know, we joke about the meeting before the meeting, and then the meeting after the meeting. And all three are very critical, and interestingly, probably the least critical part is the actual meeting. It's what you do before and after that actually makes the difference. And so when I worked a couple of projects ago, I was on the Deep Space One mission. And I always look at that as a high point in my career. I always have. I was out and practically embedded at JPL, and that's when the project really took off for me. And when I was a week in LA and a week in Cleveland, and back and forth for about 2 years. It was tough on me and it was tough on my family, but the project.
Tough on your wardrobe, also probably.
Well, it was amazing how much you can actually fit in one bag. That to me is that was a key takeaway. But
yeah.
no,
I would think
the point though was that, you know, I understood what JPL was doing. They understood what I was doing, and it was, you couldn't tell who I worked for.
Yeah, so it was a seamless.
It was a seamless. It was a team, and it was a very high-performing team, and we did really great things. And originally on the project, and the reason I bring this up was I tried to run it from behind my desk, and I went out to a meeting at JPL, and a JPL employee who will remain nameless, I overheard what he said, and the guy said, "Don't ask that Hamley guy anything. He doesn't know squat." And no one ever said that about me ever.
Right.
And so it stung, and I was, the first reaction was to get mad about it, but then I thought, you know, he's right, because I'm not doing this right, and I need to fix that.
That's a great.
And then
lesson.
after that, you know, after I, you know, flipped the switch and got on the plane and did a bunch of other things, and all of a sudden, that same individual later was like, "Man, you're a really important member of the team. We're having, you know, it was really cool, and we were having a major problem." And he came up, he smacked me on the back and said, "Don't worry, John, you got this. I know you do." So there's a big difference. Okay, so that's kind of.
You have to have a presence.
You have to. I mean, you really have to.
John talked about the meeting after the meeting, and a lot of times that can be going out for a drink or dinner, okay, after one of those contentious face-to-face meetings. And I've found that, you know, when you break bread with somebody, it makes it a lot harder to get mad at them, you know, the next time you're in a contentious situation. So you get to know them, you build some respect, they get comfortable with you, and that's a key team building element to this job.
You recognize the human aspect of the relationship. One of the things you've both alluded to, and I'm sure in the kind of missions you've had to deal with, conflict has to be there because you're dealing with smart people. Smart people are going to disagree. Do you see, I mean, there's a whole theory in terms of teams, is that you need to go through that storm. You need to go through that conflict. You know, do you see that as a real key point of a program getting effective? Or maybe another way to ask is, have you been in project assignments where things are, you know, quiet and smooth, and that makes you worry? That, I mean, is in the nature of the work you do that kind of, should you expect conflict? Should you expect that turbulence?
Yeah, I mean, you have to. You have, one thing that's true about the work that we do, it's difficult work, and there's smart people doing it. And there's multiple ways to get something done. And so as a result, you're going to have conflicts, and it's going to happen. You have to manage it, and sometimes you have to let that conflict go. I get worried when it's too quiet. You know, it's like, I'm a parent and I had young children, and that's when I got worried, was when things were quiet in the house. And I knew something was going on. And the key is to build a team, and I'll say this about my program office, we can yell at each other, okay? And then the meeting's over and we'll go have lunch. Right. Because it's not personal, you know, it's not, and that's kind of a key thing with team building. Nothing's personal. We're here to do a job, we do the job, and one of the things that, if I had one of the skills that I have that I'm most happy with, is I can separate that. I will scream at you in a meeting, and then 5 minutes later, let's go have a beer. Okay, people, you know, and because what we're screaming about's got nothing to do with the person. It's about, you know, this issue that we have, and we have, you know, you have passionate people, and that's what you want on your projects. And so, and out of that conflict, if you manage it properly, you can get great things.
Right.
as long as it's not, doesn't get to the point that it gets destructive, and you have to be perceptive enough to understand that, okay, hey, wait a minute, this is getting personal, it has to stop, or
Right.
you know, something along those lines.
Do you have any good examples where a brouhaha or a conflict happened in Aries or in Constellation or in the missions work you're doing now that led to that kind of a positive? Because I think a natural tendency for a lot of people is they want things harmonious. I mean, we want to have that kind of state, and yet what I see in most of the programs and projects is that you have to go through that kind of a shakeout, if you will. And then that leads you, if you have the respect and you maintain the team, that leads you to where you want to be.
I can give you an example from Aries 1X. It's maybe it wasn't quite in the meeting room, it was actually out on the shop floor. Our team of technicians and their management felt like they knew how to do welding, that the welding was going to be no problem. And so we went to weld up the first Pathfinder for one of the steel segments that was going to be built up into the simulator. And we got the results back from the radiography of the welds, and they were horrible. And it took that kind of realization. It was almost a crisis within the organization, the manufacturing management organization, for them and the management, all the way up the management chain, to realize that some of the things that we had been saying on the team leadership project side was that, hey, we need to do this a little bit differently. We got to reorganize how we're doing this, and we've got to bring in some outside help that we don't necessarily have in-house right now today. It took failing those welds on Pathfinder 1 to really drive that message home before the organization would react and say, okay, let's go fix this. So a little bit different twist, but we got through that, and we were a much stronger project team and organization coming out of that, because we knew we had a challenge to go solve, and everyone was able to rally to that.
It reflects, I think, one of the things, John, you had said earlier, is that you're working with successful people, smart people, and we know, from the reality is that when people are successful, they assume that you just keep doing the same thing. And in the nature of typically what NASA's doing, it's new starts, it's going beyond the envelope, so you're going to do things differently. So that conflict maybe serves as the spark to look at new ways to get better, to build on that.
Right. We had an interesting time also where we were dealing with a contractor that was building our hardware, and we had a very strict schedule, and this contractor didn't seem to share the urgency of schedule that we had. And one of the things I've learned is that you have to understand people's perspectives. If you're working with someone, you need to understand what they're coming from, where they're coming from, and also what their incentives are. And so we had this issue where we were yelling about a time criticality of this, device, and our contractor is going, don't worry about it. You could just delay the launch. What's the big deal? And then there was the realization that this particular contractor deals with geostationary spacecraft. And that slot at 155 degrees is going to be there tomorrow. It's going to be there 1,000 years from now. It doesn't move. And we got into a shouting match, and it finally hit me what was going on. And I looked at him and I said, well, as soon as you can stop Mars in its orbit, we'll be more than happy to delay the launch. And then there was this, you could see the light come on and the switch flip, and this particular manager said, oh my God, you're right. We're relying on a planetary alignment here, aren't we? He said, the problem solved, and that was it, and we came on. So there was a lot of conflict, but the reason for the conflict was just the driver between our organization that's trying to catch a planetary alignment, working with an organization that is used to building equipment for geostationary birds, and if you're a year late, it doesn't matter, that slot is still there. Your customer might not be that happy, but nevertheless, and so there was just this perspective, and you go in, and the biggest mistake that you can make is this word called assume and assumptions, and you assume that everybody feels the way that you do. Everybody understands how important your project is, and everybody understands the goals and objectives of what you're trying to do, and they don't. And that's not their fault. It's your fault for not telling them what you need to have done and build this understanding, from the ground floor up, and then you get that.
Excellent. Yeah, another great example in terms of how you have to build that team off of sometimes the conflict and the goals that are moving forward. So we have some questions from the audience here, and so I'll get into that. First one is, it says it's for Vince, although I think both of you can respond. It's about team building. And it goes, do you have any advice for project managers who lead a team largely composed of people who are only part-time to the team? So it's the matrix situation of, you don't have them full-time. How do you work part-time folks on a project?
It is challenging. I'd rather have a person assigned full-time, but it may be that for that particular role or function, I can't afford to pay for one FTE. I can only pay for half. So really the techniques are the same. You start by laying out the vision and you communicate that to the project team, whether they're full-time with you or part-time, whether you supervise them or not. What is it that we're about? What is this project trying to deliver? What are our requirements? What does our customer need us to do? And you then go from there. You're trying to get their buy-in. Okay, you want them bought into what it is you're about, what it is the whole team is trying to do. And again, you use the various techniques we've been talking about today, setting a vision, communicating it, trying to get folks to perform as a single team, going out to lunch, going out to dinner. But sometimes, every now and then, you're going to have somebody who is simply not going to buy in. Right. And you find out who those people are really pretty fast. Yeah. And they will kind of self-select themselves off the team. We had this on Ares 1X upper stage simulator, a couple folks that they just couldn't handle the pace, the intensity, and the productivity we were asking them from them. You had other people who wanted on the team because they wanted to work in that environment and work on a project that had a defined goal, very clear objectives, and a challenging schedule that they could help contribute to. So some of that winds up taking care of itself if you keep doing the things that you need to do.
Yeah. So you have to have a mindset that a team isn't stagnant. It can change. It can adapt to what the challenges are, what the people need.
Right. I'll add one more thing to that too. You're trying to help bring your people up no matter what their role is on the team, and that means helping them develop their career. So it could be that, as the people who are in your leadership positions, your control account managers, they do so well that they get an opportunity to move up and out, and that takes them off of your team. You hate to lose them, but part of your job as a program project manager is to provide an environment where high-performing people can move their careers forward. And if that means that they move on to another opportunity before you're done with the project, you cheer them on, and you go take them out to lunch when they get that opportunity, and you say, go do it.
Right. How much partly what you're saying is getting that enthusiasm for people working with you on the challenges. How much do you have to go into your programs? Loving what you're taking on or wanting to do it? Is that a negotiation when your leadership is saying, John, we want you to head up radioisotope, or we want you to head up integration? Is that how much you care for it? How does that factor into your decision of what you've done through your career? Or do you learn to love the mission that you have because it's the next great challenge?
That's a very good question. Actually, I've been fortunate in that I haven't had to make a decision like that because what's been put in front of me has been exciting to me.
What you want to do.
Okay. So I, but don't get me wrong, there have been jobs that I've had for short periods of time that I may not have been very fond of, but nevertheless, what I've learned is that I put myself into that 100% and do a good job at it, and then, because what you're doing is, your supervisors, your managers remember what you've done for them in the last 5 minutes, right? And so as a result, you want to do the best you can on whatever it is you're doing. So you're doing a great job all the time so that they're thinking, this is the individual that I want for this plum assignment over here, right? And that can be hard, but you're really, but even I have learned that the jobs that I've had in the past that I don't care for very much, you learn to get into them if you're positive about it. You can make it good and make it your own and do very well. And that's the key is if you want to know what I would tell a younger person, right? Find out what your supervisor likes and give them as much of it as you possibly can. And then you know, as a result, you do get the plum assignments. You do get to do the really exciting things that you love to do. You know, and for me as the leader of a project, what I try to do is I try to make sure everybody understands that they own this piece. I've given you this piece to do, okay? The worst thing in the world is, in my view, has always been micromanagement, okay? It never works, I don't think. I hate to use such a definitive statement, but in my view, it never works because the people working for you don't feel like you trust them. They don't feel like you've given them this job. And so, you know, it's always been for me, I try to surround myself with people that are smarter than I am, better than I am. Here's your job, go do it, and let me know. My job is to get you out of trouble when you get into it, or if I see you're going to get into trouble, I'm going to grab you and say, hey, wait a minute. You know? But that's how you get, and so to come back on that question, if you have part-time people, you want to be the most popular project or program manager to them. Okay, and that's how you do, in my view, that's how you do that, is you make sure that you're giving them assignments that are well suited for them, and they own it. Go do it. I gave you this job, go do it. If you have questions, by all means, come to me. You know, that's fine. But I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. Go do it. And that, there's been a lot of studies on that that show that's how you really motivate intelligent people with cognitive things to do. Go do it.
Yeah, and you'd have to do that because the nature, as you described, of the complexity of your missions. You're already in a state of sleep deprivation, just doing natural things. If you have to start doing all the things that are happening in terms of it would not happen. The ability to delegate would be critical there. We have another question, which gets into the issue of creativity and innovation. And it says, we hear a lot about the need to be innovative at NASA. What are some of the best practices at Glenn that help people be innovative here, or innovators here? So what helps the organization, what helps the people, what helps you be more creative, be innovative?
I think it comes back to what I build on what I said just previously, and that is people are innovative when they're given an environment that they own the work. Okay. Now they have to understand that there's boundaries around that that are very real. Okay. There's schedule and budget because we have projects. We have space flight projects. We have planetary alignments that we're chasing. We're doing, you know, whatever that is. So there are very real boundary conditions, but within those boundary conditions, there's maneuvering room, and you let people have that. And I think there's project managers here at the center that allow people to do that. Okay. Right. And the people on the other side of that coin realize their innovation may or may not be able to be supported by the project, and you have to get past that. You know, we have this other phrase, which is better is always the enemy of good enough, right? And so you cannot continuously improve on a product. Eventually you have to say, this is what we're building and we're going to go on. But I think it's very important. Like I said, you have smart people here. Let them go do what they need to do. Your job as the project manager is to keep them within the box, and their job as the person working on the project is to understand that when their idea comes up against a very real world boundary, that you have to realize that and move on. It's not, again, it's not personal, it's just business. And that's the way we have to be.
So you described a situation where, and I've worked for leaders that I've loved working for, and one of the things, listening to what you say, fills into the notion, hey, Ed, that's your area. I hired you. You're good at what you do. Make the decision and move out. And so that gives you the space to innovate and you know, to try different things.
And I mean, and at the end of the day, if I'm going to tell you every day how to do your job, why didn't we hire you in the first place?
Right.
Yep. I mean, it's just not, it's just not, it doesn't make sense. That's right.
You know, there's another aspect to that too, and that is that in our organization today, there's a lot of different roles. There's a lot of different opportunities. So it may be that a person wants to try something different, and this is something that I would encourage, particularly, you know, younger people, the next generation coming up, is don't be afraid to go do a 6 or 12-month detail in another office. Don't be afraid to take that assignment that kind of nobody else wants, but clearly needs to be done, because it's a way to broaden yourself. It's a way to challenge yourself, as well as to demonstrate to management that, hey, you're not shying away from the challenging tasks. You're willing to go take a risk and move your career forward. I think it really helps, particularly as you get into the roles that John and I are in now, to have had a lot of different experiences over the course of your career. To have that OJT, that kind of that broadening that you got by trying different things along the road. For me, it was moving from subsystem to system engineering. Right. And I got the advice to do that from an early mentor who pointed out for me that there's plenty of people who are controls specialists or it was systems and controls at the time. There's very few people really doing good system engineering, true system level work, and kind of pointed me, in that direction. And then I was able to go do that for, a good 10 years of my career, which then provided the broadening I needed to become an effective project manager, because I could look at the system level and understand all of the disciplines that needed to come together to work in it. And it's the same thing that a program project manager needs to be able to do. So don't be afraid to try something different, to get that broadening and to get that broader perspective as you move your career along.
Yeah, so part of the innovation is staying innovative and looking for different opportunities and not just getting maybe comfortable in a career.
Yes, that's right.
Which makes me, both of you have done a lot of things in your career, and certainly would be classified as having very successful careers in terms of what you're doing. How much did you, as you went through your career, how much was it the organization selecting you out, and how much of it were you looking for different opportunities, knowing where you needed to be, knowing what you're motivated by? I guess it's a question of, I don't know if it's the right word, but how assertive are you in terms of managing your career and saying, I really want to do a major, human exploration program, or I want to do something with another agency. I mean, is it something that happens kind of without reflecting, or is it a mixture?
I can tell you what happened, and how much my hand was on the tiller is left for the listener. But early on, I came on and I worked in microgravity science, and I got, I became, I don't want to say bored because that's not a good word, but I realized that I wasn't necessarily a good fit at that time for the projects and the pace of the projects, okay? People that know me understand my attention span is not very long, okay? And these projects, we would do all of the really fun engineering in the first year or two, and then there were years of trying to get it flown and so forth. And so I made a move to go to research because I saw that, and I went into power electronics because not many people were doing that. And so I said, well, let me go do that, because there's a bigger pace and I'll learn something new, and I went off and I did that. And afterwards, after DS1 flew, I was sitting there going, okay, now what am I going to do? And I interviewed for a couple of branch chief positions, because when I was on DS1, I was kind of a team lead systems engineer, and I really enjoyed that. So I said, well, let me go try and be a supervisor. And then I became a branch chief. And then after that, I spent 4 or 5 years in facilities. I went in and went into test engineering instead of other things, and I learned a lot. And that was a very valuable 5 years because I got to know how the center operated as a test engineer. That was the last job that I interviewed for after that. Okay, because then what happened was 5 years into that, the program officer said, "Hey, we need you back. You understand propulsion. We need you back. Would you come back and go on this detail?" And I said, "Sure." And I went on the detail. And then the positions that I held before that, I was, by that time I had become a GS-15, and so they could just assign me places. And that branch chief job was the last job that I asked for. After that, it was, "John, we need you for this. John, we need you for that." And one of the things I did was I never said no.
Right.
Okay, and so I went off and did those various jobs, and the same thing occurred with this. When they needed a program manager, the center director called me into his office and said, "John, we need you to do this. Would you do it?" And I said, "Sure." So
it's kind of like in the early part of the career, first of all, you were aware of yourself.
Right.
Self-awareness in terms of, these are things I like to do, these are things I don't want to get stuck doing, and you're kind of then auditioning for kinds of things you want, and then you get a reputation where people are calling you in terms of, this is how we would like to use you. So it evolves, I guess, over time.
Right.
I mean,
My experience was maybe a little bit different. I've moved several times over the course of my career. Actually, moved physically between organizations and even worked for 2 other federal agencies. I never would have guessed when I was coming out of school and got my first job at Kennedy Space Center working on the Space Shuttle main propulsion system that I would subsequently move 5 later times, and wind up here in Cleveland. I mean, you couldn't have scripted it. So it was, in each case, it was a matter of, opportunity presented itself, or, I was interested in looking at, what else is out there that, would be exciting, that would move my career forward, or move it in a different direction. Because I'm a little bit like John. After about 2 or 3 years, I'm ready for the next challenge. I get kind of stale and a little bit bored. And so, okay, what else?
Startups in a lot of your career. I know when I've run into you different places, you're starting something, going in a new direction, getting it established.
Yeah, that's right. So that was, I'd say, one of the really positive things about a federal career is that you are afforded the opportunity to do a lot of different things if you want to.
Right.
And the federal government, the civil service, is structured in a way that makes that easier and can facilitate that for you. But it's a combination of both, where do I want to go with my career, what do I want to do next, and what opportunities are out there, and can I get somebody in that new organization to take an interest in me and say, yeah, Vince, why don't you come on board?
So it's personal responsibility clearly, but also organizational, taking care of its talent, its people.
Yes.
Looking for things.
Yeah. And sometimes it's timing. There has to be
Right.
an opportunity. Sometimes you don't get the opportunity that you want. Other times it presents itself, and like John said, you've got to be willing to go ahead and take the risk, take the jump, and go do that.
Another question we have from the audience here is, yesterday we had a knowledge symposium, and we did a case study on Vasa, the Swedish ship that sunk, as it left port, and some of the different issues that come up on success and failure. And a lot of the focus was, how do you build a trusting culture? And how do you build a culture where people are comfortable to say maybe things that they would be worried, maybe people don't want to hear. How do you create an environment like that? You've been in those kinds of challenging situations. How do you do that? How do you build trust? How do you build openness?
Well, one of the ways I did it in my project teams was make sure that everyone around the table had an opportunity to speak. And sometimes it means calling on folks, okay? Because we all have different personality styles, right? And so, you have your introvert, your quiet people that they want to speak up. They've got something to say. You could see it, in their eyes. But if you don't, actually go ahead and give them an opportunity to call on them, you may not hear that key input that they may have for you that could, really affect the decision that you're trying to make, particularly if it's in a control board type setting. But then if somebody comes forward with something that you don't agree with, or you don't really like, the last thing you want to do is berate them or abuse them. Getting back to what we talked about before, that old style manager, because then that will be the last time you hear from them. And there will be other people in the room who saw how you treated a person, and they're not going to want to speak up either. And you need that input. You've got to have that input. So you make sure that the environment that you set in that room as a leader is open and trusting, and you do that starting by example yourself as the leader.
So seeking it out, asking, pulling people out, asking for opinion, and making sure that if something doesn't go right, or if you hear that you don't, basically a volcano it so that people don't go there again.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Similar thing. I totally agree. I've got some quiet folks in the organization, and I ask them. I don't try not to put them on the spot, but I will say, do you have any input? Make sure that everyone has a chance, and it's working fairly well, because now on my control boards, it's to the point where the question gets put up, and I just sit back. And listen. And you learn so much as a manager, and the people in the room realize that I'm doing that. I'm just sitting there, and it's funny. People come in with leans, and the other people in the control board, I don't need barracudas. I have them in the room. They go off and they'll go after each other. But it's done respectfully, and that's the other piece of it too. You have to understand, when you let that happen, you still have to referee, and you can't let people go after each other either. You've got, there's a healthy tension that you should have in the organization, and when it gets unhealthy, you have to get on top of it right away. The other two things that really I've done that I've seen to be very effective is I have apologized publicly for my behavior. I know a lot of managers would never do that. In fact, I had one person tell me, "Don't ever do that again. It's a sign of weakness." And I'm like, "Really? No." Okay, if I've screwed up, or if I feel that I was hard on a person in a meeting, the next meeting I make sure I publicly apologize for my behavior if I feel it's warranted. The other part of it too is that decisions do not necessarily have to be final. And we'll make a decision in a meeting, and then a week later we're smarter and we realize we can correct the course and fix it and still stay in our our sacred technical cost and schedule box. And then we go do that. Okay. And we go do that, and then people are willing to say, "Hey, wait a minute." They'll come in ahead of time. That new data shows up sooner. You know what I mean? Someone may have been thinking they don't want to say it, but as soon as they realize that the organization is agile, we can move, we can do things, then they'll come in and they'll tell you, "Hey, this is what I think you need to do," and you're going, "Wow." Because the most important decision or realization that I ever had was all the ideas don't have to come from me. I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. Okay, it could be anyone in the room. That's a great idea, let's go do it. And the other thing too that I found to be very effective is attributing an idea. If I'm presenting something to upper management and the lead systems engineer came up with that idea, as I'm presenting it, I will say, "So-and-so from my project or program office came up with this. I think it's a great idea. This is what I think we want to do." And then, and I've had people look at me, come into my office like I have 3 heads and said, "What were you doing? No one's ever done that before." I'm like, "Well, no, that's what we do." Your name goes on the presentation, or somehow your idea, it's made known, you came up with it. This was your idea, it wasn't mine, and that's why like I said, I love surrounding myself with smart people. I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room, I really don't. It's too much pressure. Don't let somebody else do that.
Yeah, let your people take the credit, let them stand up and actually present. I like what John said about apologizing in public. I've had to do that myself on multiple occasions. Sometimes you get a little heated and you got to come back and repair any damage you might have done. You praise in public, and then you provide frank feedback in private. And so that's also part of this. Sometimes you may have to provide feedback, to somebody around their behavior, or just something that's going to benefit them, in the future. Do that one-on-one behind closed doors, and that's another way to build trust.
Yeah, a lot of interest, a lot of good tips, particularly the one in terms of just acknowledging a mistake, because there's tons of research that indicates people identify with others who are human, who've basically admitted, "Yeah, I made a mistake." And also goes back to what you've been talking about, is modeling what you want. You want people to, say, "Hey, this didn't go the way planned. I didn't do it right. Let's change it."
Yes.
So important. So obviously it's worked for you, because this is the first Masters with Masters we've had at Glenn, and the two of you the first project managers that we've had. So someone thinks you're highly successful. I think you're highly, but I mean,
thank you.
Other people, it's an important kind of thing. You're both certified NASA, project managers, which is a hard thing to do. I think I got a sense that there's like 2 minutes left. So I'd like to leave with one final question. So if you can go back, 30 years, or if you were talking to your daughter or your son, and they were getting ready to start a career at NASA or working any kind of a organization that really does complex missions, programs, and projects, what's the one piece of advice you would say you would leave them with?
Well, like I said, the best advice I got was years ago that says, find out what your supervisor likes and give them a lot of it. But it's beyond that. You have to take the time to understand what the mission of the organization is and understand what they're trying to do. And that can be hard for a young person just coming in to really understand. I remember when I pulled into the DEB parking lot on my first day of work, and I shut the door and I looked at this building and I said, these people build rockets here. What the heck am I doing here? It's hard to, it's very intimidating. But understand the goals of the organization, that make sure that what you're doing contributes directly and substantially to that goal, okay? You could be really great at doing something, but if the organization doesn't value that, or the organization doesn't need it, you're going to get pushed to the side. You're going to get, okay. So, and it's not hard. It's not rocket science, right? But I mean, you should be able to sit back and say, okay, this is what these people are trying to do. The goal is to build this space experiment, to go on this HTV launch, you know, to go to the ISS, or whatever it is that you're doing. What do I have to do to make that happen? What's my contribution? And if you don't know what that is, ask, right? It's not a sign of weakness to go to your manager, your project manager, and say, I'm not sure what you want. Help me here, okay? And then that's great. And finally, the last little nit is it's always nice when someone comes to you with a problem and then they have their suggested solution, right? Because then you've got a basis to talk from, as opposed to, I don't know what to do. Then, okay, we've got to work hard. You know, I don't understand this problem. This is what I think should be done. What do you think? You know, that kind of dialogue is a lot better. I mean, those are the kind of traits in young people that really propel them, you know, along.
Yeah, you're there to work for someone, know what the manager wants, and know what the mission is, and then try to do whatever you're doing geared to that.
Correct.
Sounds like what you're saying. Vince, what would be your advice to that young professional who's saying, how do I be successful like you?
I would say make yourself avail yourselves of all of the programs that are out there in today's agency for training, for on-the-job experience, rotations and details to get that broadening. And I would say go find a mentor. This is something I wish I had done earlier in my career and more effectively. You know, go find someone who's not your supervisor and who's not in your immediate chain of command, and build a trusted relationship and have that be someone who can kind of give you that insider's view that maybe you're not going to hear from your supervisor, and who can be a guide along the way to help you work your way, you know, through the organization and to further your career. You know, I've tried to be a mentor here later in my career towards some younger people that I've had the opportunity to work with. We have a formal mentoring program, you know, here at Glenn, the ACES program. So that would be the last piece, would be go find a mentor early on, and you'll benefit tremendously from that.
Very good. Well, it's gone very fast. I lost a sense of time midway because you're getting into a lot of things and could have gone a lot other areas. But really appreciate Vince. We appreciate John sharing your expertise, wisdom over 3 decades, doing a lot of great things, a lot of missions. And also want to thank the folks here at the Glenn Research Center, particular Kathy Clark from Human Capital, and Martin Forkosh, the Chief Knowledge Officer of Glenn, and the NASA TV crew here at the Glenn Research Center, really setting up a nice warm environment. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thanks.